So I'm going to veer a little bit away from what I've been looking at before, and we want to look at cancer pharmacoeconomics. And I've actually retitled it as asking the question: is it a rip-off or is it fair play? Just 1 second. Okay, so just to set the scene, this is a logarithmic graph of the price of the monthly median cost of cancer drugs approved by the FDA. This tracks between 1970 and 2016, and here are the most recent figures from last year. And what you see that for drugs approved last year, 69% of them cost more than $100,000 per year, and 32% of them cost between $200,000 to $500,000 a year. So this is the scope of the problem, and you can see also just how dramatically this has changed over the last 20 years. So the question is this fair game? Is this just reward for innovation that needs to be respected, or is this a rip-off? Is this exploitative profiteering that needs redress? And this is the question. This is the underlying question that hopefully you'll be able to formulate your own opinions about with some of the data that I'm going to share with you. This appeared about 6 months ago. The Eli Lilly and Abbey have pulled out of the price reserve of the NIH agreements, there's NHS agreements in the United Kingdom, and they said that Europe's focus on spending cuts was detrimental to its ability to attract research and development, clinical trial, and manufacturing investments. And Bayer said it's going to shift its focus of pharmaceutical business to the US, accusing Europe of being very innovation unfriendly. So my agenda today is to talk about innovation and its motives. I'm going to talk about what I describe as the perfect storm in the United States, which I think has really led to a lot of this acceleration in the cost of prices. We're going to follow the money trail in pharmacoeconomics, look at issues of sustainability. We will look at the concept of just or fair pricing. And finally, we'll conclude with some of the ethical issues and advocacy issues. So innovation is about the development of new approaches. And for purposes of this discussion, we're focusing on innovation in anti-cancer therapies with some related issues of biomarkers and imaging modalities. When one considers the motives for innovation, one can, obviously the most desirable motives would be to improve patient outcomes, to understand advance the understanding of science, and improve cost efficiency, and less desirable are academic and scientific credit or personal gain or potential for profit. But the reality is the converse. And the reality is the biggest motivation is the potential for profit. And we'll see that the issue of improving patient outcomes is there, but it's not necessarily a driving factor. When we have innovations in cancer care, we're looking for what we want them to achieve. We want either to help patients to live longer, to live better, or to reduce costs. And by living better, we're looking at impact of either improving quality of life or delaying the deterioration in quality of life. And another aspect of living better is reducing the burden of treatment, so reduce treatment intensity, reduce adverse effects, or improve convenience. And this is the basket of really what constitutes an innovation. But new innovations are very heterogeneous in their deliveries, and some will be vastly superior to the standard of care. Some will be minor improvements. Some will be trivial improvements. and some will have really an unclear magnitude of benefit. Ideally, what are the things we want to see incentivized? We would like to see proven high clinical benefit things. I guess more important in a curative setting where people are eradicated of the disease than in a non-curative setting. And we want to see that there's really direct evidence of benefit, people living longer or living better, and not just improvement in surrogates, which have a variable degree of predictive reliability for true clinical benefit. Another issue that needs to be incentivized is unmet need. Uncommon cancers where there are few therapeutic options are going to be more important than common cancers that have already lots of options. And early treatments that make a big difference in terms of patient well-being, rather than another late-line option that may offer a benefit of another small number of months of transient benefit. Innovations all have a cost, and the issue from a financial point of view that's important is this issue of the total budget impact. And the total budget impact is derived from the cost of the medication, of relevant diagnostics, of administration, and the cost of management side effects, how long the patients are on treatment, and how prevalent the disease is. And all of these things are going to factor in on the total budget impact of any innovation. Okay, so what then is this perfect storm? The perfect storm in the United States starts in 2003 with the USA Modernization Act of 2003, which included what's called a non-interference clause. And this non-interference clause essentially meant that any new drug which is approved by the FDA must be provided by Medicare, which covers 37% of the American market. It's the largest single care provider, without price at the manufacturer's list price, without price negotiation. This is a total suspension of market forces. The next thing is the war on cancer and the cancer moonshot. And this encouraged innovation, but the way they've done this is to lower the thresholds for evidence of benefit to get market approval. So there's more inclusivity of approval. So anything that has a possibility of benefit is getting approved with less discernment. So there's less firm evidence of benefit. So this step incentivized the development of low-value medicines that did not have any proof that they were making people live longer or clearly live better. And this incentivization of the development of low-value medicines and the suspension of market forces meant that even if you had a low-value drug, you could give it whatever price you want, which is what happens. And this has led to the spiraling of prices and profits and a disconnect between value and costs. Now, this is in the United States. How does this affect the rest of the world? Well, these prices in the United States maximized US profits, but they had other impacts as well. And that's because in most of the rest of the world, they use international reference pricing and price negotiation for managed market entry. But the beginning of the negotiation starts with the United States price. That's where the negotiations are pegged. Then furthermore, the terms of the agreements from these reference pricing and negotiated market entry are concealed in non-disclosure contracts. So we have a lack of transparency. And then that lack of transparency precludes truly informed international reference pricing because you don't really know what other countries are paying. So starting with this US price business, adding these concerns about lack of transparency, the whole reference pricing issue becomes ineffectual and muddled. And as a consequence, the prices in the rest of the world are lower than in the United States, but they're still very, very high. The perfect storm has also impacted on drug development. We have seen an explosion of new FDA approvals. Between 2012 and 2014, we had an average number of 5 new approvals a year. And since 2017, since the beginning of the moonshot, we now have 32, on average, 32 new anti-cancer drugs approved each year. Now, we've looked at those approvals over the past 5 years, looking at using the ESMO magnitude of clinical benefit scale to look at how much of these are high benefit drugs and how many are low benefit drugs. And what you can see here is about a third of them are low benefit drugs. When we look at the evidence that has led to the approvals, only 30% of those, 32% of the approvals was the evidence of patients living longer, there's evidence of an overall survival gain, and the average gain was only 4.6 months. For 28%, the approvals were based on progression-free survival, which is at best a weak surrogate of either living longer or living better. And the biggest number of approvals, 40%, were based on single-arm studies using overall response rate and duration of response as a surrogate indicator of benefit, and that is an extremely weak indicator of surrogate for improved survival or improved quality of life. Interestingly, the median overall response rate was 40%, and there was no difference in the response rates between the drugs that were given accelerated approval or regular approval. So these FDA policies, or the endorsement of drugs with relatively low efficacy, plus this issue of non-negotiable costs, is incentivize the development and promotion of many low-benefit agents. When a drug is endorsed by the FDA, this puts indirect pressure on physicians to prescribe and for patients to consider using low-benefit medicines because it's got the stamp of approval of the FDA. Many of these drugs are accessible only with very substantial co-payments, and this has an end harm of high levels of financial toxicity and low levels of patient benefit. Okay, so let's now follow the money trail a little bit. This is a really interesting graph. This is a graph looking at the cumulative profits generated by recently approved anti-cancer drugs in the last 20 years. The upper dotted line and the lower limited dotted lines, these are the upper and lower estimates of what it costs, the R&D costs of developing a new agent, a new drug, which vary between $600,000 to $2.3 billion. And there's a debate about the estimates. But what you can see on this logarithmic scale is, number one, on a logarithmic scale, most of these drugs very rapidly exceed the threshold of the R&D costs. And on average, the return was $15 for every $1 spent in R&D. So, this is a massive, massive profitability that far exceeds any estimate of R&D costs. Interestingly, if you look at the launch price and the relationship to clinical benefit, there's zero relationship between the cost of the drug and its clinical value evaluated either by the ASCO value framework or by the ESMO MCBS scores. Globally, the expenditure on anti-cancer drugs, current estimate is about $218 billion. In another 4 years, it is estimated to receive to get to $377 billion globally. Now, the pharmaceutical sector is one of many sectors in the S&P 500, but, and this is an important point, if you look at the average profits from every other sector, most of them are substantially lower than the pharmaceutical sector. So the pharmaceutical sector has become the most profitable sector in the industrial world. And on average, it's about twice as profitable as any other sector, such as materials or energy or mining. The relationship between R&D spending and sales, R&D far exceeds, so the sales far exceed their R&D expenditures. But it's important to point out that the R&D expenditures, and not just from the drug companies, a very substantial part of the R&D funding actually comes from government sources, and then the companies subsequently buy licenses to further develop drugs. So much of the R&D cost has actually been paid by government along the way. Another important and interesting fact, which is often underappreciated, is that in terms of pharmaceutical industry costs, on average, they spend twice as much on marketing, that's the red bar, over what they do for R&D. Almost every company has a much bigger sales and marketing budget than they do have an R&D budget. Now, we talked about this massive profitability of the pharmaceutical industry. The other key issue is that it is predominantly driven by oncology sales. This is really the milking cow. If we look at across the different pharmaceutical sectors, this is the profitability of the oncology sector compared to all of the other sectors. And between 2018 and 2024, this is the growth. So there is unprecedented growth generated by the profitability of these new agents that is really driving the massive profits of the pharmaceutical industry. Now, if you ask pharma, and this is in the words of their professional organization, their role is to develop medicines that enable patients to live longer, healthier, and more productive lives. But when they are tasked with making decisions on how to spend their profits, executives repeatedly prioritize shareholders' payouts over drug research or making the drugs more affordable. And there was a congressional report looking into this. They spent more money on stock buybacks and investor dividends than on R&D. The top 14 drug companies spent $577 billion in stock buybacks, and the annual executive compensation went up by 14% during this period. And these are the sorts of figures that you see for compensation for a CEO, $135 million annual compensation, $48 million annual compensation. So to summarize, why are drugs so expensive? Well, there are these issues of costs of development, manufacture, marketing, and distribution. but the big issue is profit. The statutory suspension of market force in the United States, the international reference pricing, which is pegged to the US price and hampered by lack of price transparency, and policies really of unrestrained profiteering. This clearly has non-trivial consequences, and the non-trivial consequences really are issues of sustainability. That the economic resources that we allocate to healthcare are finite. Cancer is just really one of multiple competing needs. Cancer is highly prevalent. The therapeutics are increasingly expensive. The global costs are now $185 billion a year and rising. Most of it is spent on non-curative therapies, and more is spent, vastly more is spent than on any other condition. And this is just not a sustainable framework. The WHO has been addressing this through their Fair Pricing Forum. This is a global initiative to try to improve the affordability and value of cancer drugs, and to simultaneously preserve and promote adequate incentives for capital investment and for research and development. They acknowledge that this is an intrinsically challenging aim. And in their 2021 report, they say they acknowledge the difficulty in even defining what is a fair price, and they've established a working group to address this issue. We'll come back to this issue of what is a fair price a little later on. But they did have a couple of concrete suggestions. One is to promote price setting that is performance linked, and this can be facilitated by having robust health technology assessment processes to incentivize high benefit treatments against low benefit treatments, to promote transparency, so that would enable really true international reference pricing, and to encourage managed market entry into all markets. Managed market entry means when you've got a new drug, to say, look, at that price we're not going to let you into the market, but if you lower the price down, then if it's at a level that we feel is reasonable and appropriate to the magnitude of clinical benefit, we will reimburse it and cover it. And their final recommendation was to reform this Medicare Part D issue to allow for price negotiation, because this is a root problem. But this is a root problem which is strongly resisted by well-funded and organized resistance from the pharmaceutical industry and from the financial sector, which has become addicted to the profits being generated by the pharmaceutical sector. And we're going to come back to who owns big pharma. So market access agreements work, and when you look at the prices of drugs in the United States compared to countries that have robust HTA processes like Australia, United Kingdom, and Israel, they achieve prices that are overall substantially less to countries without managed market agreements. The United States has taken a first step, but it is a baby step, and this was the Inflation Reduction Act of August 2020, and this empowers the US Secretary of Health and Human Services to negotiate prices for a limited number of drugs. But this is a very limited act. It's only 9 years after a drug has been approved. So initially the price is going to be very high, limited to 10 drugs a year in 2026 and increasing to 20 drugs by 2029. So, but by giving 9 years of maintaining this system of, you know, whatever price you choose is what's going to be paid for, this really doesn't address the root of the problem, and it's not likely to have a substantial impact. This is a story, you know, why have governments been so reluctant to take this issue on? And the issue is that who owns the drug companies? We do. A third of the stock in big pharma is retirement is pension funds, and the pension funds have become addicted also to the profitability of the pharmaceutical industry. So you know, this is part of the reason why the issue on a global scale is really so complex. Okay. What constitutes a fair price for a drug? And I'm very grateful to Hagop Kantarjian, the hematologist at MD Anderson, who's really been an incredible champion pushing this issue within the medical world. Just pricing, or fair pricing, as opposed to unjust pricing, proposes a price structure that reflects the magnitude of patient benefits, the value, that ensures a reasonable profitability and maintains adequate incentives for research and development. And you know, the big accusation that comes out of pharma all the time is if you cut our profits, we won't have incentives to create new drugs. And there have been various proposals that have been made, but they have commonalities. They all take into consideration research and development costs. They all take into consideration sales and marketing costs, but you know, you're trying to encourage reducing marketing costs. They all have a target level of profit, and they all take into consideration the target population. And yes, as it is, these are hypothetical models that have been proposed, and there's really no concrete suggestion on the table. Another idea which has been floated is indication-based pricing, and that's to say that with many drugs, they're used across many different indications, but in some indications they're delivering a very high level of clinical benefit, and in other situations they're delivering a very marginal level of benefit. And why should we be paying the same price for the drug when in situations where it's really providing very little? And there have been 3 different approaches to this. One is to have individual indication pricing. So with a drug, you know, when it's being used in a high benefit indication, it will have a high price, with a lower price when it's being used in a low benefit indication. A second model is a complex calculation of a weighted price, which may rise or fall with the development of either high or low benefit new indications. And the third model, and this is a model which was trialed in Italy, had a fixed price, but there would be individual indication refunds. So in an indication where only a small proportion of patients were benefiting, there'd be the company would pay back for all the patients that didn't benefit. Logistically, this was overwhelmingly challenging and did not work. Okay, so where does that leave us? I am a big fan of Daniel Kahneman, the behavioral economist, And he had an old paper on fairness as a constraint on profit seeking. And he argues that pricing can be influenced by appeals to fairness and justice. And that in the case of medicine's moral force and an appeal to justice can be applied, highlighting concerns of exploitation and highlighting concerns of a social responsibility for fair pricing. 10 years ago, I had the privilege of having a sabbatical year, and I worked in the Department of Bioethics at the NIH with the late Alan Wertheimer. And Alan was a philosopher. He was the sort of the world expert on issues of exploitation. And based on his work and applying it to this situation, you can see that extravagant pricing and the profiteering and cancer drug markets actually meets all of the criteria for exploitation. And those criteria are that the relationship between the patent holder and the purchaser is asymmetrical. The subordinate party, which is the government or the consumer, needs the medicine to get optimal benefit in duration of survival and quality of life. The subordinate party, the government or consumer, depends on a particular provider because of patent protections. The provider has discretionary control over the availability of the needed medication. The price is disproportionate to the gains, and the price paid causes harm to the subordinate partners in the transaction. So these are all this is really applying the cost of drugs to all of the classic criteria for what is described as exploitation. As physicians, we primarily think about duties towards the patient, about fiduciary relationship, our responsibility to the individual patient to get them the best of care and not to harm them. However, physician duties expand beyond that, and we have public health responsibilities as well, to sustainability and to the just use of limited resources, and this has been clearly described by the Physicians' Charter of the American Board of Internal Medicine, where they say that the medical profession must promote justice in the healthcare system, including the fair distribution of healthcare resources. So I ask you to reflect on this data set to see, is this fair game? Is this just reward for innovation that needs to be respected, or is it an exploitative ripoff that needs to be redressed? My personal inclination is with the latter, but I understand that there are others that hold differing opinions. My 5 concluding thoughts are that the issue of balancing incentives and sustainability is challenging, that currently there's a profound imbalance, that industry is prioritizing the financial interests of its shareholders over patients and sustainability, that the rising costs of cancer medicines cannot be justified by upstream R&D costs. That's just the big lie. And the physicians and their representative bodies have a duty to promote sustainability, and this includes, one, the responsibility to discern between high and low value treatments and to discourage the use of expensive low value treatments. And secondly, to take on an advocacy role for social justice and against exploitative pricing policies. At any presentation that we have from industry of a new drug, at the end of the meeting, there'll always be the question of how much is this drug cost, and why is it so unreasonably expensive? And I know that these people don't answer the questions, but the questions need to be heard and echoed back up the line of command. So I thank you very much for hearing me out, and I would really look forward to hearing your feedback, questions, and discussion. So I hand the things back to you guys.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Brilliant illustrations. I've been in the field for a long time, and quite a few graphs I still haven't seen. So really very, very interesting information. Please go ahead. Any raised hands? I prioritize your questions. It would be great if you turn on your camera if you'd like to ask a question. And we do have a few questions and comments in the chat, but let's start with David. Please go ahead.
I just wondered whether in your price comparison, you didn't have the other well-known exploitative business, which is scientific publishing. How do the profits compare with scientific publishing?
I don't know, but the profitability of the pharmaceutical. I mean, I didn't have data on the profitability of the publishing sector, but it is not a major sector in the S&P 500.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Peter, great to see you on camera. Please go ahead with the question.
Thank you. Thank you. It's in the chat also. I am a geriatric neurologist, so I've worked in the Alzheimer's field for 50 years. Yeah. And actually organized the first pharmacoeconomics conference on Alzheimer's, in which I attempted to expose ahead of time the likely behaviors, not to any great success, because that field has been specifically modeling cancer all the way through. And that's a larger market because it basically involves everybody who's getting older. Yeah. So do you have comments about how do we treat this this metastases into the field I've devoted my life to?
Well, you see, the Alzheimer's situation actually has another similar issue insofar as the level of the evidence being derived for benefit is all surrogate evidence. With a low degree of predictive reliability. So there certainly is a commonality there, and certainly the pricing for the newly licensed therapeutic options has also been extravagant, and I just see that the cynical side of the market sees this as a rich business opportunity. And again, so approving low benefit drugs, giving them a high price, creating pressure, creates pressures. And you're in the United States, so even people with insurance in the States who want to try these are going to have, on average, a 20% copayment. So the financial toxicity in the United States, which does not have a strong national reimbursement system, is much greater than it's going to be in other countries.
Thank you, Nathan. Shmuel, thank you very much for raising your hand. Please go ahead with your question.
Yeah, of course. See, I personally agree with the majority of things you spoke in your lecture, but I want to ask you, what, according to your opinion, need to be alternative? Among others, what do you think about idea to eliminate private pharma industry and to nationalize all private pharma companies?
Well, that's a political philosophy decision, and I think that I do believe I do believe in private industry, but I think that there is a some degree of failure of industry regulation, and you know, the notion of nationalizing all drug development, I bring it under government control. I don't foresee that as a plausible option really anywhere. Outside of autocratic regimes.
Thank you. Indeed, very difficult question with impossible solution. Nathan, I have a question for you. I've been struggling with this at NICE for a long time, but obviously it's not just NICE. Keeping confidential pricing is one of the solutions to manage to use this tool for regulating prices in Europe or lowering prices down. And I've always been very against it, understanding the need for this. So, and I always was trying to find the way forward to try to get rid of this confidentiality and make this transparency, because actually NICE does publish prices. And I remember we had one case.
NICE published some of their prices.
Yes. But they publish the prices. Let me just finish. They publish the prices, which are not the negotiated prices. They're list prices. And we did have one situation some years ago when Brazil phoned to say, oh, hold on, we thought those are real prices. And we negotiated our discount based on that, while it turned out that UK price was half the price which Brazil negotiated. And considering the GDP per capita, of course, that was very misleading. So the argument I've heard back from people who are actually very worried about the situation, but they are not in pro transparency of pricing, is that if we make prices public, this will be very, very detrimental for the third world, where very significant discounts are being given in India and Indonesia, and they are kind of a level down from what Europe gets, and will basically harm those markets. What do you think about the defense?
Because I think that prices need to also to be related to the GDP of the purchasing countries, and countries that have a very low GDP should have a different schedule of prices that is proportionate to their GDP. And you know, now the challenge with that is, how do you prevent then parallel export? Okay, you know, if the drug is, I mean, and this was a reality. The Herceptin was much cheaper in Romania than in many other European countries, and what was happening was hospitals and other users were purchasing their Herceptin from Romania, which was being exported out. You know, so they're buying cheap Herceptin, and then the Herceptin wasn't available for the Romanians. This is a problem of parallel export, and so there need to be some sort of a mechanism to protect against parallel export with these sort of differential pricing setups that are GDP based.
Thank you, Nathan. Difficult case, uncrackable, I would say, for the moment. John, please go ahead.
I got the sound on. Yes, thanks, Nathan. A great talk as usual. I just wondered if you'd looked into the future of the impact of a number of the drugs, and how many I'm not sure, going off patent and becoming generic. Yeah.
So, okay. First, what is happening is the price goes down, but not a lot for many of the drugs. So, like imatinib, formerly Glivec, it was very expensive. It's now with the development of generics and with biosimilars, the price has gone down about 50%, but it's not gone way down.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know, you're seeing this more with the biological trait drugs. You know, so some of the chemotherapy drugs that were very expensive, once there are generics, their price goes a long way down. But there is still massive profit taking in that 10 years, and then there are all sorts of manipulations to try to prolong the patent. So saying, you know, one of the stories, but the story with Herceptin is the patent has now been extended by making it as a subcutaneous injection, and just changing the formulation.
So not a big difference.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Nathan? In October, we are going to have two events related to the subject, not exactly on the subject, but exploring side issues of the problem that Nathan has raised. But Nathan, I think one big conclusion from your talk is that the key players are very comfortable with the current system. And this is one of the reasons this situation is getting worse for those who think that prices are high and access to medicines is not equal. And this problem is, and the situation is getting better and better for those who are profiteering from it. And
what we forget is that the people, we are profiteering from it.
Exactly. And this is a locked circle. It's a catch-22 situation because of the shareholding and because of many people actually play on the stock market and end up buying pharmaceutical shares, and it's in their interest to enrich themselves in this way. So it is a very broken system, and maybe it requires some absolutely radical solution to fix it. But once again, the interested party needs to have a lot of power to change it, and I think interested parties are quite weak at the moment.
But in the meantime, we can call out those expensive drugs that are also very low benefit and discourage their use.
That's what you do through your ESMO work, and there are other publications looking at it. It's outside oncology. This is what Consilium is trying to do. So there are a lot of groups working on it, and hopefully the at least decision makers at the clinician level, at the patient level, will realize little things they can do to change the situation.